All right, family, peace. Welcome to another edition of Baba TV, Every Time Fire. And as you can see before the screen, our esteemed elder statesman, I want to run through this. He really needs no introduction, but I want to run through this again. Our elder has spent over 50 years incarcerated for a crime that he has maintained his innocence in the killing of a couple of police officers, some say in retaliation to our late great brother George Jackson. And he has served double the time, triple the time, quadruple the time, if you ask me, of anybody who should be incarcerated in New York for the same crime. He is out now, several degrees while he was incarcerated, and he does not have time to waste or play today. And I'm not gonna play with brother Jalil Muntaqim, so I'm gonna hurry up and get out the way. I'd like to present to some and introduce to others our brother Jalil Muntaqim. Receive him, family.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate the introduction and give me a platform for which I can share some things with your audience and the broader audience at large. As you well know, that we have been engaged in a struggle, right? A struggle for liberation and independence for Black people in this country. In my last opportunity to be on your program, I talked about the Spirit of Mandela Coordinating Committee and what we achieved back in 2021. In fact, it was October 25th, 2021, where the international jurors found the United States guilty of the charge of genocide against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people on 5 charges. The 5 issues of 5 charges that were brought to the international community, particularly by the international jurors, was mass incarceration, health inequities, environmental racism, police murders and killings of our people, the existence of political prisoners, right? Those are the 5 charges that the United States has been found guilty of, and cumulatively, it results in our suffering conditions of genocide, right? 1948 Convention on Genocide. Since then, I've had the opportunity to do some traveling and discuss these issues. I think last week or last month rather, I was in Miami for the National Black Caucus of the Teamsters Union. And they allowed me to be their keynote speaker. And I was able to present to them our accomplishments and achievements under the Spirit of Mandela campaign to raise the issues of our conditions here in the United States, particularly in regards to the decision of the international jurors finding the United States guilty of genocide against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. That was received very well. And in fact, the trade union had asked the Black trade unionists of the Teamsters, that component, the National Black Caucus of the Teamsters, asked, what can unions do? What can the workers do in regards to our campaign and building this up? Naturally, we want everyone to raise these issues in their communities, amongst your faith-based community, amongst your activist community, amongst your workers, right? And let them understand what are the conditions that are confronting Black people, Brown people, and Indigenous people in this country, and why they exist. Why do we have to suffer the way that we have? At this point now, I'd like to share with you that I am the special projects coordinator for Citizen Action, a New York State-based nonprofit organization that try to treat the issues of impoverishment, healthcare, lack of education or improper education and housing situation here in Rochester, and many other issues like climate change, as for an example, that Citizen Actions deal with. And so we've been working in regards to this matter, a question of 13th Amendment. I've been dealing with the question of trying to end penal slavery in New York State. 8 states thus far has changed their state government constitution to remove from that language of their constitution involuntary servitude and compulsory labor. What a lot of people do not know is that the United States have more people in prison than any other industrialized nation in the country, in the world, in fact, right? And as a result of the system that we live in of capitalist imperialism. And I'll talk about that a little depthly as we go on. However, as a result of 1865 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution, that reads and states that slavery and involuntary servitude should not exist in the United States except for those who've been duly convicted of a crime. So there's an exception clause in the 13th Amendment that allows for the state to treat people who are incarcerated as slaves. Two cases by the United States Supreme Court, Ruffin versus Commonwealth and North Carolina Prisoners Union, Prisoners Union against North Carolina prison, right? In each of those cases, the Supreme Court stated that prisoners are slaves of the state. Bold letters. Understand that we have slavery in America. That America has never abolished slavery. It, in fact, institutionalized it, right, under the 13th Amendment. And therefore, we find mass incarceration, right, as an issue. Because what you're doing is that you are sending people into a slave system, mass incarceration, into a slave system, so that you can reap exorbitant profits from their free labor or pennies on a dollar. And this has been going on since 1865, where the state has been able to reap profits from free labor of people, particularly people of color, who laws are and policies create conditions from which we can send our people, particularly our young people, into this penal slave system. The prison pipeline, as an example, right? It is real, and it's across the country. Whereas they're creating conditions in the school system to suspend our children much longer than they suspend white kids, right? And therefore, when you put the kids out of school, you lead them into the streets. And what happens? Ultimately, it leads them into the carceral system and then into the penal slave system. So these policies, these regulations are deliberate. They're intentional. And what they do, they create harm for us and our community, right? And we need to understand that, right? Another example is the welfare laws, right? Where we have welfare laws, and let's look at this. There's what, 20, 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, they changed the welfare laws that stated that if a woman is receiving welfare checks, she cannot have a man in the house. Cannot have a man in the house. So what did that do? That destroyed families, right? It particularly because we're of an impoverished community, right? And so therefore, what they did was take an incentive for a woman to try to better herself and better her children, right? And then remove from her the capacity to do so in many instances by removing another income from out of the household, the man. Right? And what that did? That destroys the family structure, right? It creates animosity between black men and black women or the Latinx family, right? And it destroys community, right? Community is based upon having families bonded together. And if you don't have the families bonded together, you cannot have a community, right? There's no established community from which one can really say that I belong here, right? And we're working to improve these conditions in this community. That doesn't exist. And so what we find is that because poverty is a progenitor for crime, more often than not, we find in our communities criminal behavior, right? We find our communities being inundated with drugs. Now, how did that happen? That's also a policy and regulation that is deliberate. We all know about 20 years ago, maybe a little longer, about the Iran-Contra debacle, all right, where the United States was trafficking drugs in order to give weapons to the Contras in Nicaragua, right? We know about Highway Rick and that whole dynamic involved with that, where the CIA was actually bringing cocaine and drugs into our community to create the crack epidemic. Do we understand the impact that has had on our community, right? Do we understand that it was deliberate, that the government did this to us, right? And that we are not upset. We are angry at the people, at the brothers and sisters on the streets trying to rock it, trying to find a way to survive, right? Although I agree with you that they're doing it in a way that hurt us more than help us, right? But the reality of the situation that it is contrived, right? It is deliberate. It is planned by the policies of government to create a condition from which our communities are impoverished and white folks' communities and people of other races outside of Black, brown, and indigenous are be able to prosper. Be able to prosper. And so we have involved in the course of our struggle in terms of the Spirit of Mandela activities that we need to remove ourselves from these conditions, right? Let's go a little bit deeper in our understanding of what's going on in our community. So we know that the CIA, the FBI, and the other forces are bringing drugs into the United States, or assisting in the drug delivery into the United States, and therefore and inundating our community with these drugs, right? That's a given. That's understood. Now, the problem what we're having here in regards to this is that our street gangs or our street communities, street tribes, they don't understand the politics that's involved, and they're committing these kind of, in no way other way I can put it, atrocities against our community. These shootings that's going on in our community, right? This intrafacial killing that's going on in our community, brothers killing brothers, right? That word messes with me, right? Infratricidal killing that's going on in our community. We have to address these issues in order for us to build the kind of unity and understanding that we need to have in order to challenge the system of oppression. Right? We have to be able to look inside our own community and recognize that we're under attack. Have been, right? 20 years, and it goes on today, right? 20 years ago, they said that the Black man is a endangered species. How does that happen? How does the Black man become an endangered species? Because the system of white oppression against Black people, white supremacy, right? We live in a system of white supremacy. We have been navigating a system of white supremacy for over 400 years, right? And naturally, as a result of that, right, we have been traumatized, severely traumatized, to the point where we consider conditions in our life today to be normal. That's how much we've been traumatized by these conditions, that we haven't accepted them as being a normal reality. It doesn't have to be that way. It don't have to be normal, and we don't have to normalize it, right? And so we find that our own blood, right, in our own community, are creating atrocities, killing our babies, right? Our babies killing each other, and babies having babies, right? It's part of the conditions of impoverishment that confronts our community, right? And again, I make this point explicitly clear: it is deliberate. I'll give you an example. Right here in Rochester, that's where I reside, right? There is a politician by the name of Adam Bello, and he's trying to create a new juvenile detention center. You know, if they build it, they're going to fill it. And you know, if they fill it, we're going to fill it with our people, our young ones, right? And usher them into a system of slavery by law, right? So we're making an argument, we're making a fight, we're making a campaign not to have this detention center built, so the money allocated for the detention center can go into areas of housing and clothing and food deserts, right? Recreation programs and other things that we know diminishes the conditions for criminal behavior. Right? This is true safety, right? The true safety is when we allocate the funding where it needs to go in our communities, and we make an argument in order to improve ourselves, improve our community, right? And diminish the capacity from which we're engaging in internalizing fratricidal killings, right, and harm in our community, right? So it's important that we begin the fight to ensure that there are funds allocated where they need to go. What that means, right? The other day here in Rochester, we had a meeting, 45 different organizations. 45 different organizations and individuals attended this meeting for the purpose of considering the idea of building an anti-poverty task force. Right? And I am appealing to people across the country who listen to this, right, or activists who listen to this, to find a way and means to build consolidation, a coalition amongst as many as you possibly can, dealing with issues of poverty in the community, and develop a people's budget. We need to build a people's budget and challenge the budget of the state. Right? We're telling the state that the people said these are our needs. And this is where we want our money to be allocated, our tax dollars to be allocated towards. Right? Now you're challenging the system in a very coherent way right? But we're also raising people's consciousness and understanding how money is being misappropriated and misapplied, being stolen from us as a people, right? So the task for us is to build these campaigns, right? These people's budgets, right? And challenging the budget of the system, the state, right? Making an assessment of how they're using that money and making a determination, well, amongst ourselves, where that money needs to go, and fight for that. Fight for it. Fight for how money is supposed to be appropriated and allocated into our communities. Right now, part of the course of the Spirit of Mandela campaign that we have achieved in getting this verdict of genocide against Black people, we decided we need to remove ourselves from harm, from future harm of genocide. And so we're in the process of building what we call, I'm gonna see if you can see this here, building the People's Senate. All right, it's extremely important that we recognize that the system is not functioning and operating in our best interest, has not and will not. That's the way the system operates. The system is based upon two particular ideals, right? Individualism and competition. You cannot have a capitalist system without competition, and you cannot have a capitalist system without individualism. And what is the opposite of that? Right? Cooperation and unity. So for us, in terms of our movement, what we need to build going forward, like the People's Senate, building the People's Senate, we have to build greater cooperation amongst as many activists that we have in our community. Those who are really engaged with boots on the ground, trying to alleviate the situation of impoverishment in our communities. We need to build unity. We need to build cooperation in this work, right? And in so doing, we build unity, right? That's the opposite of individualism and competition, right? We want to build cooperation and unity, with specific goals and objectives to be achieved in the community to alleviate, to mitigate against the conditions of impoverishment, right? And challenge the system in terms of how they are allocating funds that, for most part, bypass our community, Black, Brown, Indigenous community. And so we have to get organized. And so we are building to what we call the People's Senate. And anybody who wants to get involved and engage in this process, right, then go to spiritofmandela.org/People's Senate. And there you'll be able to find this document here, right? The explanation and recruitment manual for the People's Senate. And you can sign up, become a member of the organizing team of People's Senate across the country. And what we intend to do is build assemblies, people's assemblies across the country, and link those assemblies by their representative senator, and begin to create alternative economic, socioeconomic, and political institutions for our survival, for our prosperity in this country. We have to. And the reason why I say that, because let me explain something else to you in regards to why this is a necessity. The United States is a corporation, right? You have pledged allegiance to a corporation. This is what Malcolm X and Hajj Malik Shabazz said, that we've been hoodwinked, we've been bamboozled, right? That we've been took, right? Because we don't understand the laws and we don't know how they apply, right? And in this instance, just like the 13th Amendment that created penal slavery, right? We didn't understand that penal slavery that the slave was never abolished in this country, that was put into the penal system. We don't know the law. And so we're ushering our children and our young people into a system of slavery. Then we wonder why they come out as angry as they have been, because they're treated as if they are slaves while they're in there 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. I spent almost 50 years in prison. Right? I survived because I continued to fight. Right? I would not capitulate. My principles and my ideals of who I am as a human being, as a man, as a Black man, right, and as a revolutionary. I do profess to be a revolutionary. And I can talk about that a little later. In either case, what we have found out is that the United States, according to 28 USC 3002-15A, this is law book, right? You can Google it. 28 USC 3002-15A states that the United States is a federal corporation. Okay, so it's established as a federal corporation. And so therefore we're pledging allegiance to a corporation. And we know the corporation's primary goals and objectives is to what? To make profit, make money for their stakeholders, right? Not us. And the reason why I say not us, because we're people, real people, sentient human beings, flesh and blood human beings, not us. And the reason why I say that, again, is because the United States Supreme Court, in the case of People's United, or Citizens United, stated that corporations are people. Makes sense out of that for me. How do corporations become people? Because you're dealing with a corporation, the United States. So therefore, the people that the United States are talking about, for the people and by the people, is for corporations by corporations. And that's the reason why we find ourselves, true human beings, sentient human beings, fighting for the crumbs of a social order that's based upon profiteering and competition and individualism, basically based upon greed. And we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. So what we find is that we have a system where 740 people or corporations, representing 740 corporations, control $6.9999 trillion, all the wealth of Western Europe. All the wealth of Western Europe is in the hands of 740 people or corporations, right? All the wealth of Western Europe, 740 people, $6.999 trillion. And we live in a population of 330 million. And we are complicit because we're allowing this hoarding of wealth by the 740 while we fight for the crumbs off their table. Crumbs off their table. Right? So when we look at the conditions within our community, particularly the Black, Brown, and Indigenous community, we can find that it's deliberate. Right? That they make the decisions and say who will be redlined, where will you be housed, how will you be receiving medical attention, right? How you'll be able to feed yourself, right? White people live twice as long as Black people in this country. Talk about health inequities, right? White people live twice as long as Black people in this country. Why is that? Don't we have the same opportunities to get health care? No, we do not. No, we do not. All right? And so white people live twice as long as Black people. Right? We're talking about mass incarceration. Here you put people in prison in their teens and leave them until they become gray-haired old men while in prison. That's the time of their reproductive years. Most of that's reproductive years. So you get 1,000,000 people, 1,000,005 people, 0.5 people in prison during the most productive years. You know, them out as old men, elderly. Right? They're not reproducing. So they can understand why our population, particularly the Black population in the United States, has not grown exponentially as other populations, other ethnic groups. Has not. We have become stagnant in our growth. Do you understand what I'm saying? Stagnant in our growth in the last 50 years. No marginal, real change in terms of growth of our population. That's genocide, people. That's genocide. Health inequity. Environmental racism, one of the charges. Why is it that we have the greatest amount of asthma, greatest amount of diabetes, greatest amount of health, heart problems, disorders, the greatest amount of kidneys and liver failure than any other people? Environmental racism, right? We live in conditions where there's lead poisoning, where the water is polluted, where the land is polluted, right? And so therefore our bodies become polluted, right? So we have the highest level of cancer, high level of diabetes and asthma and every other kind of illness that comes out of conditions of poverty. It's deliberate. It's intentional. You can't tell me they don't know what they're doing. You can't tell me that. All right? They've been doing it for too long. Over 400 years. And so here, that's the fourth charge, the third charge. And then we have political prisoners. They don't want to recognize the existence of political prisoners. Why? Because recognizing the existence of political prisoners is to recognize where they come from. Resistance to a system of slavery, a system of economic labor, slavery, right? I'll give you another. Let me share this with you. Again, in Rochester. Rochester is the third worst city of poverty in the country. Third worst in the country. right? But it's 80% employed. The population 80% employed. Okay, almost nearly 100% employed. So why would the third worst in poverty? Because everyone who's working, either working 2 or 3 jobs, particularly Black, brown community, 2 or 3 jobs, right? And for poverty wages, at best minimum wage. What? This is deliberate. This is to ensure that there's a community individual for menial and manual labor. That's all they'd be able to do. Menial manual. That's usually why the school to prison pipeline exists, right? And we had dilapidated schools. So we cannot teach our children how to prosper in the social order that's based upon individualism and competition, right? So that's the reason why we are now demanding we have to build a people's senate. Why there's necessity for us to build something, an alternative to the existing social order, socioeconomic order. Because this socioeconomic order does not do us well. We do not benefit from it. Yes, there are some success stories. There are token cosmetic success stories, right? In order for you to aspire to be like them, we're never given the opportunities to grow and evolve like them. Okay. Some say, well, they're lucky. No, they weren't lucky. It's more than that, right? They have opportunities that the majority of us do not have, right? Cannot obtain. They're not given to us. And that's the reality. And so it's important that we know that here in Rochester, we are in the process of building what we call a Rochester Anti-Poverty Task Force, right? Because we feel that there's a necessity to have a task force to organize ourselves in the capacity where we are challenging the system as to how funding and money is being allocated, where it's being allocated, and why it's not being allocated where we know the money needs to go. All right. And therefore, we're raising our consciousness, raising our class consciousness, because we recognize that in this system, right, based upon competition and individualism, that there are also class divisions. All right. Class divisions. And so we're engaging in what's called a class struggle against those who are hoarding wealth. Now, all religions tells us and informs us that hoarding wealth is what? A sin. Hoarding wealth is a sin. If you're religious, if you believe in the divinity, if you believe in the Abrahamic religions, right, and some of the Hindu religions and others, right, Taoism, etc., right, informs us that the hoarding of wealth is a sin. And so what that tells us, it tells us that we live in a sinful country, right? Could we validate and support the ideas of hoarding wealth, right, to the detriment, the few hoarding wealth to the detriment of the many? And so we're engaging in class struggle. We're engaging in struggle for national liberation and independence for Black people, right? It is time for Black people, particularly Black people, what I identify as New African, to remove ourselves from places of harm, conditions that harm us. And that means we have to remove ourselves from a system that has been diabolically engaged in the processes of genocides against us. That's not an outright, throw you in the gas chamber genocide like the Holocaust of the Jews. This is a long-term process of population control. Because they need to have a population to do the menial and manual labor. That's us. We always have been. Since the days of chattel slavery. Right? And we're saying that for those conditions to exist, right, we have to recognize our own inferiority. And that's what leads to the trauma that we have suffered as living in a system of over 400 years of white supremacy. For white supremacy to exist, you got to have a population that feels inferior to that population that feels themselves superior. Do we understand that? So therefore, we have been engaged in a system that tries to maintain us as being inferior to the dominant race, or to the race that is maintain a system of dominance. Right? And so that is what we have to engage in. That's what we have to struggle with within ourselves internally. Right? This kind of innate sense of inferiority. Right? The subjective sense of inferiority. that has been inculcated within us, has been taught us, and been trained in us, right, by a system of white supremacy for the last 400 years. But let me add something else to that point. According to the DSM-V book, which is the diagnostic book of psychology and psychiatry, right, it informs us that superiority complex is a mental disorder. Stay with me now. A superiority complex, according to their book, now it's not my writing, it's their writing, says the superiority complex is a mental disorder. So what is white supremacy then? So what is white supremacy? It has to be a mental disorder. Anytime an individual or a group of people believe that they are superior than any other people on the planet, they are suffering from a superiority complex. Right? And essentially, according to their book and their writings, it's a mental disorder. So what have we been governed by? We have been governed by people who are suffering from a mental disorder. And so therefore, we can find that as a result of our relationship with these individuals, with this group, with this social order, that we also have suffered trauma, mental disorder. Right. So we got a long ways to go in order to reestablish ourselves and who we are as a people, based on our own history, trajectory of history of resistance, and trajectory of history of our own creation, civilization building. So you cannot tell me that we cannot build our own nation within this nation. We can't. Only have to have the will to do so, the desire to do so, to recognize within us that we have the capacity to do so. Right? And so the part of that process is building what we call decolonization committees across the country, to decolonize our minds, decolonizing our thinking, right? And in the process of doing so, to empower our community. Empower community. So we need to build alternative systems of survival, what we call decolonization programs, right? And we're going to build this under the principles of what we call a national strategy of Front for the Liberation of African Nations, right? It is written in my book entitled "We Are Our Own Liberators." You can get the book at Black Dragon mme.com. And in it, when you get the book, I want you to turn to this page right here, the National Strategy of Front. And in this, you will find our efforts to build a national front for the liberation of the African nation. Right? We need to separate ourselves. We need to divorce ourselves. We need to remove ourselves from harm as a people. That means we need to establish ourselves as a sovereign nation. Now, some people ask the question, what Jalil, we live in the United States. We are Americans. If you identify yourself as American, you identify yourself with your enemy. With your enemy. The people who despise your very existence. That's who you're identifying with. All right? You're identifying yourself with a corporation. Not a nation, a corporation. Let's understand that. All right? That's not what I'm saying. That's what the law says. It's written in the law. The law says that's what it is. And then for us, it is important that we reassert ourselves as being of African descent. Of African descent, who we are as a people. Right? Those who say they are African American, they identify themselves as African American, let me tell you something. They're schizophrenic. And I mean that in a loving way. Right? Because you identify yourself with half of who opposes the other half. America has never been in support of Africa, never have been, never will be, for the exception of extracting its resources and its labor, right? And ensuring that they are able to dictate, right, through colonialism and neocolonialism, what's going on in Africa. So for us to support America is for us to reject Africa. And I said we need to change that mindset. We need to change that reality, right? And so therefore, we those of us who are conscious of building nationhood identify ourselves as New Africans. Right? Now, let's make this point explicitly clear. There are sovereign nations within the territory, 2,000 by 3,000 miles territory, that is corporate, known as the United States, but the indigenous people entitle this country, this territory, as Total Island. So I'm saying the word Total Island. When I refer to the United States, in this instance, towards the liberatory dynamics, I'm referring to Total Island. And so in Total Island, there are sovereign nations. Right? There are native, indigenous, sovereign nations within Total Island. Who says that we cannot become one? Right? According to the international law, right? And I'm just going to read this from out of the book. Do you understand what I'm saying? According to the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15 states this. I'll bring it as close as I possibly can so you can read it. Can you see that? Everyone has a right to a nationality, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality or denied the right to change his nationality. Huh? So who says that we cannot become New Africans? Who says that we cannot establish our own sovereignty? Who says that we cannot remove ourselves from harm, from genocidal harm? Right? We must. We have an obligation to, for our children, for our progeny, for those who become behind us. Not only that, but the law further goes on to say, international law further goes on to say this. Let's see if I can find it right quick. United States Declaration on the Granting of Independence of Colonial Countries and Peoples affirms, 1, that the inherent right of colonial people to struggle by all means at their disposal against colonial powers will suppress their aspirations for freedom and independence. Right? Al-Haj Malik says that we're going to be free by any means necessary. That's the language. International law. Right? The International Code of Civil and Political Rights and International Code of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights states this. All people have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Human rights. We, people of African descent, in here in Turtle Island, never had the opportunity. We never had that choice. After the 13th Amendment, they created what they call the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is the amendment for due process, right, and naturalization. So we never had what we call a plebiscite vote to determine, after 1865 and the Emancipation Proclamation, 1865, 13th Amendment, we never had an opportunity to determine whether we want to return back to Africa, whether we want to establish our own sovereign nation, or whether we want to be part of the social order of this corporate government. We never had a choice. It was imposed upon us. But what was imposed upon us was not full citizenship. A second-class citizenship. Right? And Al-Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X told us that a second-class citizenship is no citizenship. You're just a second-class slave. Right? And we have normalized these conditions. Right? We have normalized this reality. And I'm saying to you, it is not normal, it is abnormal. It is part of the trauma that we have suffered, that we have inculcated this idea of being second class, of being less than, of being devalued, of being inferior. You see? And that's the course of action that we need to take in order to remove ourselves from those kind of conditions, that kind of thinking. If thought precedes action, right? Thought precedes action. If a person can be a criminal, he has to think like a criminal to be a criminal. If you think like a boss man, you got to be a boss man to act like a boss man. Right? To be a free people, we have to act like a free people. We have to think like a free people and respond in that capacity. Right? So we have to change our thinking. We have to begin the process of building decolonization programs and moving forward with that idea that we have a move to free the land. Right? That we're going to build based upon international law, right? And our will to do so, our own nation, New Africa. All right, now, let's go back to history a little bit. Prior to the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, right, we had the Emancipation Proclamation, 1861, 1862, Emancipation Proclamation, that permitted that the land from St. John South, the River St. John South, North Carolina, South Carolina, North, River St. John South, to the Florida Basin would be emancipated territory. And for emancipated slaves, they moved in those areas, moved in those territories, and began to establish their own governing bodies of national liberation or national territory, right? Liberated territory. That's what was called the Freedom Bureau. The Freedom Bureaus began to create what we talked about here, as we talk about the People's Senate, right? The Freedom Bureaus was creating institutions of governing. And so we began to build our own nation within this nation. All right, and then it came with the 14th Amendment. Okay, but not only did it came with the 14th Amendment, then they had this Hayes-Tilden Compromise. Rutherford B. Hayes won the electoral vote, while Samuel Tilden, who was a Confederate, won the popular vote. In order for them to decide who's going to be the new president, Samuel Tilden compromised with Rutherford B. Hayes that you will have to remove the Yankee troops from the liberated territory where we are building out our nation, remove the Yankee troops from those territories, and then you can become president, right? With no problems from us. Rutherford B. Hayes agreed. And you know what that started? 100 years of lynching. They removed the troops, 100 years of lynching. The Ku Klux Klan, who evolved from the Confederate, who were Confederates, began the process of removing us from the territories that was our homeland. Right? Remove us from territory. And that started the first major exodus or migration out of the South, right, to the North and to the West. Right? But today, we still find that the majority of Black people in this country still live in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, the 5 states that we know as the Black Belt. The majority of them still live there. And not only that, but there's many of us returning back to what traditionally is our homeland in Turtle Island. That's our homeland in Turtle Island. Right? And so we're in the course of building out a movement to free the land. Right? To establish our sovereignty. Right? That's the course of struggle we can engage in. Right? There's a necessity for us to do so because we have to remove ourselves from a system that's been engaged in genocides against us. We got to remove ourselves from harm. And we have to create a new sense of self, of who we are as a people. Right? And that's part of the process of becoming a sovereign. Right? To divorce ourselves from a system that has been oppressing us for over 400 years. And so, again, it is important for us to note that on October 25th, 2021, the international jurors found the United States guilty of the charges of genocide on 5 charges, 5 issues, like mass incarceration, health inequities, environmental racism, position of political prisoners, and state-sanctioned murder of our people. Okay, cumulatively, that tantamount to genocide. For those of you who do not know or understand what the word genocide or what the meaning of genocide is, let me just read it out to you real quickly. Like, according to the 1948 Convention on Genocides, right? It says the present convention genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group. We know they be killing us, right? We know that, right? Some we heard about, right? Like Floyd, right? Like Breonna Taylor, like Castile, and many others that we know have been in the news lately. But there's a majority that we do not hear a word from. Black, brown, indigenous people being killed every day in this country. We don't hear about it, right? Cause serious bodily and mental harm to members of the group. We know that the level of mental illness in our community is higher than most, right? As a result of our trauma and living in a system where we are considered to be inferior to another group of people who consider themselves to be superior. Mental harm. It's damaging. It's traumatic. Right? 3, deadly inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Right? Mass incarceration. Physical destruction in whole or in part. In years where we're supposed to be reproducing, there's none. There's no growth, no birth growth. Right? In whole or in part. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. We know that our women, many of our women have been sterilized without their consent. Right? There was a struggle in Puerto Rico about maybe 30 years ago, where there were women being sterilized without their consent. Groups, whole. There's a case in Chachala prison system in California, where the women are making a fight against them being sterilized against their consent. Right. So this is going on in this country. More often than not, the women are silent about it. But you rest assured, there are more women being sterilized without the consent than is being known, or is being told. Forcibly transferring children of a group to another group. You know, they did this with the Native Americans, with the indigenous community, right? Took them away from their families and gave them to missionaries. And the missionaries did what? They cut off their hair, they changed their name, prevented them from using their language, and essentially deculturalized them, right? Make them a non-entity, a non-source. They have no connection to their native heritage. But that's the same thing happened to black people in this country, right? We have no serious connections to Africa, right? When we brought to this country, we were speaking Mandingo, Mandinka, Hausa, Fula, Igbo, a host of different languages, Arabic, a host of different languages. And what happened, right? Then we began, the miscegenated us with who? What? The Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, the French, the quote unquote, the Americans, British, miscegenated. So now we speak all these languages around the world. Wherever you find black people, and let me make this point especially clear. Wherever you find black people, I don't care if you go to Australia, New Zealand, Germany, South Africa, Brazil, they're downtrodden all over the world. Because we live in a system of white supremacy, a world system of white supremacy, downtrodden all over the world. All right. So that's part for us to understand it. And so in regards to our own sovereignty, right, we have to reestablish who we are as a people. Because they took away our language. We don't speak our African language anymore. Right? Very few of us do. Imagine, just sit back and imagine. What if tomorrow black people across this country start speaking Swahili? Huh? That's a changing dynamic. Language. Because language leads to the culture and leads to behavior. If we start speaking Swahili tomorrow, changing our entire language, right? Although Ibonics is our own language, but changing our language, right? And our culture and understanding of that, it divorces itself from a system. It removes itself from the system, at least psychologically and culturally, right? It makes it put us in a different category. Right now, we are less than what they want us to be, second-class citizens. All right. Forcibly transferring our children from a group to another group. Why is it that there are more of our children, black and brown children, in foster care than any other people? That means that those foster care children are absent of family. I already talked about what they did with welfare and ensuring that cohesive relationship they have between men and women, black men and black women, right? And so we find now that the system has been so devastating on our people that we're losing our families, we're losing our children going into the foster care system. Do we understand that? It's part of the genocide. All right, so we have more people, more young people in foster care than the other people. That means that's more families have been broken up and destroyed by this system, right? It's genocide, forcibly transferring children of one group to another group. And Article 3 states further, the following to be punishable. Genocide can be punishable. Conspiracy to commit genocide is punishable. Direct and public excitement to commit genocide is punishable. Attempt to commit genocide is punishable. And complicity in genocide is punishable. And so what we find that the United States, in their own law, 18 USC 1009 is the law that the United States signed a treaty with the 1948 Convention. It's genocide law. And so the United States is in violation of their own laws based upon the verdict of the international jurors, finding the United States guilty of genocide. So they have genocides on the books in the federal law, this corporate federal law. But you know damn well the United States is not going to charge itself or have committed genocide against black, brown, and indigenous people. They won't do it. So it's just for show. It's on the books just for show. Right? So we have to begin the process of where we can file a lawsuit against the United States for its commission and engagement in genocides against black, brown, and indigenous people. So if there's any attorneys, law students, law clinics that are interested in supporting that campaign, the legal fight, right, which will raise consciousness and build a movement, right, an understanding of the genocidal nature of this government towards black, brown, indigenous people, please contact spiritofmandela.org and let us know that you're interested to become part of the People's Senate, right, and that you are bringing this talent to the table, all right. Your capacity to engage on the legal front, right, in this struggle, in this overall struggle. And so I want to return this back to our host. I think that I shared with you, for the most part, the work that we do in Rochester under the banner of Citizen Action of New York, which I am the special projects coordinator, and we are organizing what we call a Rochester Anti-Poverty Task Force, right? And we're building this task force out for the purpose of ensuring that allocation of funding goes where it needs to go in our communities, and so that we can challenge the system of oppression that goes on in our community. Second of all, I shared with you that we're also building on a national level under spiritofmandela.org, the People's Senate, right? That we're building alternative systems of governing, right? Because we recognize that this government does not work and function in the best interest of us and our people, right? And lastly, based upon the book, right, we're on Liberators, we're building out what we call the Front for Liberation of the African Nation, right? And in this instance, we are organizing what we call decolonization programs, right? During the course when I was in the Black Panther Party, they had was programs, survival programs, pending revolution, right? And we had the free breakfast. See, there was no free breakfast program before the Black Panther Party. There was no major sickle cell anemia research going on before the Black Panther Party, right? This transportation going to prisons and visiting family, that did not exist until the Black Panther Party, right? The health clinics, I mentioned that health clinics in our community, they don't exist until the Black Panther Party. Black Panther Party brought more alternative institutions for our survival than any other organization that we know of in contemporary time for our community. And that's the reason why it was a threat. And they had to destroy the party. And they used every resource that they used to destabilize a nation, including poison pen letters, infiltration, provocateurism, and assassination, right, in order to destroy the Black Panther Party. Because they recognized the Black Panther Party was liberatory. It was freeing people's minds and mentalities and understanding who they are. They were removing that cast of inferiority from our people and building us to a level of esteem, of value. That's why they destroyed the Black Panther Party, right? Because they need to have a people to be inferior and function in menial and manual labor, like slavery, right? Just like the penal system is still slavery. Right? And so we have to evolve in our own understanding of the systems that we engaged in, right, and understanding our position in the system, right, and the goals and objectives we need to achieve as a sovereign nation. Right? That's where we need to go. And so in fact, I'll leave this open to anyone who believes otherwise. I challenge you into a debate of whether or not we need to become a sovereign nation, right? Or whether or not we need to divorce ourselves from a system of capitalist imperialism and white supremacy. All right, I challenge anyone to that debate. All right, the history and the law is exact. It is set up and maintained for the purpose of continuing to keep black people, brown people, and indigenous people inferior, right, and exploitable. And we're not no longer consider ourselves inferior or exploitable, expendable. Our lives have become expendable. This is the reason why they shot the kid, I think it was in Chicago, right? Shot at him 100 times, hitting him 60 times. Only takes one bullet to kill a man. 60 times? One kid? What was that for? To impress upon us to the degree from which they will terrorize us and our community. Right? That's state-sanctioned terror. It has an indelible impression on our minds and thinking, say, damn, 60 times? So this was Chiefs, that guy. No one was charged. What? With impunity. Do we understand what's going on here? All right? Fear, creating fear in our community so we will not resist. You see? That's what had destroyed the Black Panther Party. I'll give you another example. I'm talking about the violence that goes on in our community, right? This internalizing infanticidal violence. I said the word right there this time, I think. Infanticidal violence that goes on in our community, right? And they want to control the guns going into our community. We don't bring the guns. We don't make the guns. How do guns get in our community, right? But keep this in mind. California was an open carry state when the Black Panther Party came into existence, right? And when the Black Panther Party began to hone their weapons, right, according to the law, carrying them in the streets, what do? They changed the law, create the Mumford Act. That's usually why they went into Sacramento Assembly to try to make sure that the law stays the same. They changed the law. When Black people arm themselves with the consciousness of freedom and liberation, they will change the law. So, if you want to remove guns in our community, organize gun clubs. Organize gun clubs in our community. Teach our young people how to use the proper use and training and operation of weapons, right? Train them that the weapons are supposed to be used for your personal and family protection. Nothing more. Teach them that. This is what white kids were taught, right? They teach their kids go out hunting, right? To go hunting and rabbit hunting and chicken hunting and duck hunting, and we don't do that, but we hunt each other. What's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with the mentality of that picture? So what we want to do, right? We want to tell our people, develop gun clubs. Right? Start teaching our children the proper use. If we're going to teach children, but at least teach the elder, the young people, the middle-aged people, the proper use of handling weapons. That in the Black Panther Party, you had to have a shotgun in your house. That's mandatory. Every Black Panther household had to have a shotgun for self-protection. Right? That should be the same reality going on today. But right now, they want to remove the guns out of our community. So they make us, they disarm our community while arming theirs. What kind of sense does that make? Right? They're not going in their communities talking about buybacks. Right? Buying guns, talking about that they doing this to save the community. No. You're disarming the community after we have into a process, a cycle of internalizing warfare and the intrafatal killing of each other. Right? Diminishing the capacity for which we have trust and faith with each other in our families. There's so much suspicion, so much apathy, so much harm that has been done that we feel that looking up is like looking down. We don't know which way is up. Okay, so you want to end the gun violence in our community? Organize gun clubs. All right, and watch how fast they start removing guns out of our community. Watch. Watch how fast they start saying, hey, wait, what's going on there? They're wisening up. Yeah. They're wisening up, right? Because we are tired of living in a system where you are engaging in genocides against us. Period. Done. Right? And so we're engaging in the process of building what we call the People's Senate. People's Assembly. We are engaging in the process of decolonization programs, doing the decolonization programs across the country. We're in the process of building task force, right? Anti-poverty task force. So we can ensure that the money that goes into these cities and goes into these towns is distributed where it needs to be distributed into the communities who would most need of that money. All right? We're trying to end this system of hoarding wealth. With 740 billionaires, with $6.9 trillion, all the wealth of Western Europe has 740, and 330 million people are fighting off the crumbs off their table. Right? And they use divide and conquer. Right? White racism is one of the means of divide and conquer, prevent us from uniting across all ethnic and national races in this country against a system that's based upon the exploitation of our labor. Thank you.
And thank you, our Baba Jalil Muntaqim. This is the brother that's out. So many of our political prisoners don't make it out of the belly of the beast after serving 50 some odd years in the penitentiary, was denied parole, I think 18 times, 15 times,
14 times.
14 times.
I was denied 13 times and released for 14. I was scheduled for my first parole hearing was 2002. I didn't get out to 2020.
Wow. Well, he's out now, family, and he's stationed in Rochester, New York. We need to gather around our brother and wrap our arms around him and take heed to the message. He paid a price for us, and this platform is open to you, sir, anytime you are ready. My little Baba TV is your home. Whenever you're ready, you can always call, and I'll rush to open this platform to you at any time. And I'm just so happy that you're home, you're strong, and you're well, and we need brothers and sisters like this. And with that being said, if you don't have any other to say, I'd like to give us a little inspiration. You've given the information, and I want to give our people a little inspiration. Would take us on out of here with Midnight, and this one is called Bushman.
Truly in your brother man. I take you life. I'm taking away your death. Spare you this wine. Spare you this shame. Right now you would be just the same. I believe you miss. Respect I miss it. I am like a pushman. I am a pushman. I am a pushman. I am a pushman. I am like a pushman. I am a pushman.